This video did not come out on Saturday. Now, the reason this video did not come out on Saturday is because I have been fretting over everything about this video as I just pull up my script. Yes, you may have heard that right. I actually had to make a script. Unfortunately, every time I've written a script, more and more stuff has come out that we should talk about for concerns going into 2019. So, the new year's always a time to reflect on things that happened the year before. And I mean, what better way to reflect on those things than to apply 2018's issues to concerns that I have going into 2019? Gaming, quote-unquote, journalism, Blizzard Entertainment, woke flicks, microtransactions and attacking the gaming industry's consumers, and more importantly, censoring people because they're offensive. I'm your humble hostess, Aubrey from Evernath Gaming, and these are my concerns going into 2019. To start us off, I approach these topics as a gamer, but one who's fed up with the bullshit, the labeling, the deceit, and the disrespect we get for doing what we should do, criticizing games and developers both constructively and negatively. To start us off, we have to address a touchy subject: politics. Now, for clarification, just so that I'm not labeled, although I probably still will be, I dislike politics. While I understand they're necessary, I still feel like a lot of people get riled up about them, which, you know, is kind of a shame. But it also seems that the gaming industry is slowly being wormed into, like a caterpillar with an apple, or James with the giant peach. The caterpillar is the political ideals and concepts that are slowly infecting the gaming industry, things that have no place in a video game. Gaming journalists then, in the same vein, alongside SJWs, have taken to labeling gamers. I mean, it's not a new trend for them, as they have consistently tried to paint us all as misogynists and racists. For example, NBC conflating what happened in Charlottesville to being solely Discord's fault, claiming the service is a breeding ground for the alt-right and the KKK.
Before white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and white nationalists marched in Charlottesville, Virginia in August, they were organizing behind a computer screen. And a lot of that organizing happened through a messaging service called Discord, which was originally created to connect video game players to one another. This is just the latest in the long-running shared history between the gaming community and the alt-right.
Absolutely ludicrous. These are the same people who think all games should be beatable by everyone, a concept not too unfamiliar to political circles, which is known as equality of outcome. Before we get on to what the hell equality of outcome is, it's important to remember that these are the same people who got upset over 8 seconds of dialogue in Doom Eternal, saying that it mocks immigration, when the UAC, the demon-worshipping cult, clearly states,
"Remember, demon can be an offensive term. Refer to them as mortally challenged."
Or, Earth is the melting pot of the universe. In fact, these people being willing to all of a sudden conflate demons invading and slaughtering people and essentially invading Earth to immigration kind of paints SJWs as racist. Who'd have thought? So anyways, what is equality of outcome? Well, to understand what equality of outcome is, you have to look at its counterpart, equality of opportunity. Now, both of these are, at their very base, just political concepts. Equality of outcome is generally viewed as a more liberal idea, and equality of opportunity, generally a more conservative one. A good example of how to compare the two is think of applying for a job. So for example, let's use me. Say I'm applying for a radio station job as a morning or even an afternoon show host. Alongside me, 5 other people apply. In an equality of outcome situation, all 6 of us would be hired. Mind you, that's regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, everything like that. But most importantly, regardless of skill, time spent in the field, practice, and capability. This idea runs parallel to all things like, oh, all video games should be beatable by everyone who buys them, or demanding diversity of race in video games, some of which, by the way, would be out of place. For example, poor old Kingdom Come Deliverance, a fantastic game, has been called racist for not having any black people. I think it's a pretty confident statement to make that black people weren't generally in the area of Bohemia in the 14th century, a time when the Holy Roman Empire ruled over the area, but nope, must be racist. People hating on Soulja Boy for releasing a counterfeit console, must hate him because he's black. Fans dislike Battlefield 5 because of the shift from realism to fantasy concepts like a woman with a bionic arm, must be sexist. Battlefield 5. In reality, people who disliked Battlefield 5 disliked it because it wanted to get all political and have a woman with a bionic arm as a frontline soldier, two things that wouldn't even be possible back then. Bionics and women on the front lines. But of course, Patrick Soderlund, instead of understanding that, fans were kind of upset because we preferred realism in our video games, as we have had in many of the Battlefield games up till this point, he sought to label us and shame us. We, the people who disowned Battlefield 5 as being a political boiling pot, all of a sudden, we were unintelligent. Yes, because questioning your fanbase's intelligence is a perfect way to shift more copies of your game. He labeled us as sexist and said we're insecure, as if he was suddenly the foremost expert on insecurity. I mean, given how he reacted, that probably might be the case. Maybe Patrick should take a look in the mirror. I mean, trying to earn brownie points with games journalists who defend your actions is just petty and pathetic. We saw similar incidences in 2018 with two other key members of the gaming industry. Number one, Diana from The Division 2, the same woman who called PewDiePie a Nazi for giving a shout out to a man who made a video PewDiePie liked, which just so happened to have Jewish jokes in them. Diana was fired because people threatened to boycott the game. And even though I doubt Felix is a Nazi or even a Nazi sympathizer, the Wall Street Journal and Diana both attempted to paint him as if it was the case because, I don't know, they dislike him? Kind of a petty reason. Label someone as the worst thing in history just because you dislike their opinions. Very, very adult, by the way, Diana. You might remember, Diana, a few years ago you tweeted on your own personal Twitter, in some scenes, she looks Asian, but other than that, the movie's good. So, you essentially said that Asian people are hard to look at. My, for someone who preaches diversity and good vibes, a few years ago, you certainly sung a different tune, didn't you, Diana? But that's the problem. As many people like our dear Diana want to forget, people can evolve and change. And furthermore, just to mention a point, I know some people of a liberal political nature who watch Alex Jones. Not because they think he's funny or even really that smart, but because it's human nature to explore possibilities, to partake of differing opinions and cultures. Of course, doing the latter in this day and age would have you slandered as a culturally appropriating bigot. Truly, what an understanding and accepting time we live in. Or doing something that's entirely natural to a person, exploring other people's ways of life in an attempt to add to one's own understanding of the world, is attacked and labeled and shunned, as if it's something taboo. I hate to break it to you games journalists and SJWs, but this isn't the 1950s, and the topic you're attacking isn't morphine. For one final comparison, let's look at none other than Jessica Price, former narrative team member for Guild Wars 2, who constantly called the fans man-babies. The straw that broke the camel's back was when she went to Twitter to talk about creating a narrative for MMOs, something traditionally difficult as it requires your narrative work to be very linear and applicable to all players. Doror, a famous streamer of Guild Wars 2 who also has his own character in game as a merchant, so kind of a big deal, he responded saying that she had some good points, and he even offered her some good constructive criticism. It was truly one of the most wholesome posts I've seen on Twitter in forever. And yet, how did Jessica react? How did dear old Jessica Price treat Doror? Someone who has said before, he thinks she's amazing. He thinks she does great AMAs. Quote, here we go, woman in game development being mansplained to. Ah, yes. Mansplaining, the mythological concept right up there with hate speech, white privilege, and unicorns. Mansplaining, the concept that if a man explains something to a woman, he is victimizing her and he's being a sexist. How these people manage to jump through so many hoops of mental gymnastics is impressive. And I'm sure if she was still competing as a professional gymnast, Kathy Rigby would be evenly matched by some of these people's capabilities. I mean, if mental gymnastics required anything more than half-baked concepts and actually required some effort and some skill on people's parts, then maybe. Jessica Price, to no one's surprise, was fired, alongside another colleague who defended her. Now, I can understand her being fired, and her colleague was likely fired to save face. But I also have another bone to pick with Jessica Price. She took to Twitter in May to say this. The only kind thing I can say is I'm glad he's no longer around to do harm. You see, in reality, she meant I'm happy he's dead. And whose death did dear old rude bitch Jessica Price take joy in? None other than the legendary YouTuber and influencer and content creator, John Total Biscuit Bain. Not even having the basic human decency to say his name. Instead inserting asterisks instead of letters. You know, Jessica, the only thing I can say about you, because even giving you time in this video makes me want to vomit, is that you're a shallow and soulless human being who does not deserve to ever again darken the doorway of a game development studio. Because you've proven that your attitude towards the people you supposedly wrote stories for is nothing short of disgusting and downright fucking rude.
And now for something completely different.
Microtransactions. As more and more countries investigate the predatory practices of loot boxes, it's only a matter of time until the head of the snake is cleaved clean off. The head is none other than Electronic Arts. The people who stand to lose the most if loot boxes are policed and regulated. The people who stand to fall on hard times if microtransactions are sanctioned against and removed from video games entirely. Poor, poor EA. If only I could actually feel an ounce of pity for one of the greediest game developers in the world. But I can't. For the same reason I can't bring myself to play World of Warcraft. They've both become something I can't support. The former a company that is the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail, seeking ever more profit at the cost of its consumers and its fans, or in this case, EA's tail. On the topic of microtransactions, we of course have to talk about the shareholders, because they should be held just as accountable as the companies who they hold stock in. In their pursuit of infinitely more wealth, they drive the companies they hold stock in to produce more money. With nowhere else to turn, companies turn to microtransactions. The constant cycle of deceitful practices, which lead into more consumers leaving, which leads then into more microtransactions and cash grabs pushed on a fan base that's growing more and more aware of the bullshit practices that are used to feed this vicious cycle. It has to stop, because if these companies continue down this road, we won't just see another games market crash. We'll see a good chunk of the more corporately oriented AAA companies go bankrupt, unable to cope with the policing of loot boxes, the crash of the stock market and subsequent profit losses, and the amount of fans grabbing torches and pitchforks. Finally fed up with the lies and the broken promises. For all the people who are probably going to say, oh well, you don't understand the stock market. Probably not, but I do understand that history repeats itself because humanity is too stupid to pay attention to it. So it's only a matter of time until the stock market crashes once again. Furthermore, my concern is that loot boxes and microtransactions won't stop. They're going to get progressively worse, like a disease slowly infecting its host. The microtransactions will sweep across all AAA games, but of course, I must admit that's a bit of a redundant fear. There are many great games who still define the concept of gouging their customers, ripping them off day by day. I can only, however, imagine why. Moving on from that to Activision Blizzard, more specifically Blizzard Entertainment, but Activision's getting dragged into this as well, the cheeky little buggers. Blizzard's been recently compared to a liquidation sale, prompting many fans to be worried about the fate of the company that has brought us so many fantastic games across 2 or even 3 decades. Many of you may remember Amrita Ahuja, Captain Cost Cutter. Well, as it turns out, Activision Blizzard and Blizzard Entertainment have lost both their CEOs, as Spencer Newman, who at one time worked for Walt Disney Company, left ActiBliz just after 18 months, earning a severance package of, $10 million. Money that would have been easily justified if it was put into revitalizing the company's franchises, but I must admit I'm just a YouTuber. I mean, surely I don't know anything about longevity. Surely Activision is more capable than me of defending their staff from the poacher known as Netflix, who, on the other hand, have been getting sued by companies for thieving their staff. Good old Wokeflix, the company who wants to race-bend characters in shows just to fit political narratives. I can't imagine why people are so pissed off about the Witcher series being a thing on Netflix when they want to make certain characters of a all-Scandinavian cast black. But hey, at least their poaching skills are good. As it turns out more recently, Amrita Ahuja was also sniped by a company known as Square. No, don't worry, not Square Enix, we can still trust them to at least be decent. But it shows such abhorrent disregard for other people's well-being. Of course, I say that. I mean, that's like saying leeches are evil. In reality, leeches have just adapted to survive in such disturbing vampiric ways due to the habitats and natural spot in the food chain as an invasive species. Of course, comparing a company to a blood-sucking leech is viable. I mean, after all, leeches only want to drain your blood. World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth has lost more subs than any expansion in the MMO's history, possibly due to the fact that world quests were copy and pasted into the new expansion without any concern for making them feel fun or engaging, which coincidentally is pretty much every system that currently exists in BFA, just copy and pasted from another expansion and made somehow worse. At least you didn't have to pay, however, to get into the Legion beta. I mean, now we have to actually pay full price just to get into a game that is in beta. Speaking of fully priced, Diablo 3 is the very icon of stagnation, having gone years without receiving any meaningful content updates. Diablo Immortal, of course, was announced, sidelining the possibility of Diablo 4 getting an announcement trailer that would have probably alleviated fans' overall disgust in a Diablo skin job mobile microtransaction cash grab, which is made in collaboration with a company known for making game skin jobs. Here's a tip, Activision Blizzard. If you're working on Diablo 4, which at this point I doubt, you don't leave your current fans waiting without a drop of content coming down the pipe because, Path of Exile looks ever more enticing, and I wouldn't really blame people for going for that after BlizzCon. Speaking of content, or should I say censorship, Overwatch is still failing to do the one thing it needs to compete with other titles. innovate. Now yes, I would have admitted at one time that Overwatch is fun, but to this date we still do not have a PvE or story mode. Hell, even For Honor had the decency of giving us that. And this news just came down the pipe today. Feels bad for the 18,000 Overwatch accounts that were quote-unquote punished by Blizzard for daring to offend Generation Snowflake. Yes, you see, I no longer support Blizzard for this very reason. This was the straw that broke my camel's back. Blizzard has a thing where if you watch Twitch esports, especially with Overwatch, you have to link your Twitch and Battle.net account. Apparently 180,000 accounts were banned due to being quote-unquote toxic. Now, while I don't like toxicity in video games, attempting to curtail massive amounts of people is going to do one thing for you, Blizzard. It's going to do what I'm worried about the most. To hell with StarCraft, who hasn't gotten an update in years. And to hell with Hearthstone, who continues to make money hand over fist because it tries to play on people's impatience. Doing shit like this is trying to censor people. What are you, 1984 and Big Brother? Are you the Ministry of Truth all of a sudden? Because that's what it looks like. Deciding to ban 18,000 accounts because they were guilty of apparently toxicity, throwing games, going AFK, bad language. Aw, does Snowflake get their feelings hurt? It's the internet. Grow up. This is my main concern with Blizzard. All of these things, coupled with Activision demanding more money and less costs, is only going to end with the death of Blizzard. You see, a while back, I decided against buying anything Blizzard related, especially when I was looking at posters, because I didn't feel like I could trust the company. But I will say that I recently bought a BlizzCon 2018 key poster. Not because I particularly like BlizzCon 2018, I think it was shit, but at least if the company goes under, I'll have something to commemorate the times and the fun the game gave me. Or games, gave me. Before we get to the final topic, I want to talk about two great people. Two great people who are sadly no longer with us. But two great people who nonetheless proved that they had a great amount of unspoken respect for fans. Stan Lee, the man who took so much time out of his life to sit down and hang out with fans, partaking of the fandom and the beautiful creations that he himself helped make. This is the same man who helped create a generation of comic lovers, superhero fans, and cosplayers. Stan Lee in 2018 unfortunately passed away. But I will say we shouldn't be sad, because at least now, wherever we go when we die, he's been reunited with his wife. And that I feel like is important. I feel like I'm happy to let him go as long as he's reunited with the love of his life. Stan Lee had a great amount of respect for the people who called his comics and art fandom, who called his comics great, who partook of his stories and the worlds he built. And number two, we have Steve Jobs. A man who obsessed over quality to the point of, I was going to say, being at fault. The only real fault with Mac is that they're not modular. You can't really build them like you can a PC. This is the same man who called the Microsoft CEO at church twice and said that he was sending people to pick him up. When he finally got out of church and asked what was going wrong, Steve Jobs' response was, well, the logo's color is wrong. It's got the wrong shade of yellow. This was a man who was obsessed with quality. He gave people the best quality. I believe Steve Jobs and Apple were the first people to really reinvent the idea of a storefront. No longer would it be cramped and crowded and compact. It would be open and bright and colorful. I want to bring up Stan Lee and Steve Jobs because both of them, throughout their lives, created great things. But they also both had a great amount of respect for their communities, and never once did they attack them. Never once did they treat them like garbage, because they had respect for the people who helped create the thing that was created. For Steve Jobs, he was thankful and grateful for the people who helped make Apple a competitor to Microsoft. And as for Stan Lee, he was happy to spend time with the people who called comics and Marvel home. So to cap us off on my final point, attacking the fans. Now I mentioned this earlier with people like Patrick Soderlund and Jessica Price, who wanted to not only attack fans, but sought to earn victim points with their friends in the gaming journalist sphere. Got a question, is it kind of like some kind of grocery store point system? Like if I save up enough victim points, can I eventually buy a single solitary fuck to give these people? If you're willing to attack the people who buy your game and support you, then you deserve everything you get. Because you as the consumer have a right to be treated with respect, and if you're not, the people who attack you invariably prove that they're biased pieces of shit who don't deserve a position where they're crafting things for their fans. Furthermore, to cap this off, this very short final bit, I promise. Labeling people and silencing people doesn't make them go away. It only makes the issue boil and fester until it finally explodes. Much like, for example, it did in Charlottesville. Silencing people and labeling them only serves to shut down the conversation, and I'm personally not shocked that the majority of gamers hate gaming journalism as a whole. It's censorious and it's toxic in every sense of the word, because it seeks to silence those with a different opinion, and label we the gamers who call out their bullshit. If we don't like Soulja Boy's knockoff consoles, we're racist against black people. If we hate on Jessica Price, we hate women. If we dare have a differing opinion on immigration, we're pro-Trump Nazis. It's ridiculous. But those are just my concerns going into 2019, that these things won't get better, they're only going to get worse. But I want to hear your opinions in the comments below. What do you think the future of gaming is going to look like? Will the age-old saying if it gets worse before it gets better be true, or are we truly headed for darker times? Let me know, and other than that, I've been your humble hostess, Aubrey from Evernoth Gaming, and as always, I love you all and you mean the world to me. Happy belated New Year, by the way. I hope to see you all in the next episode.